What am I? What are we anyways? What am I? What are we anyways? Hi everybody, welcome back. Okay, fair crowd today. Jacinta, Raul, nice to see you. Madame. Feelings are the fuel and fire and fury of life. Feelings are the fuel and fire and fury of life. In the deepest organismic sense, brainstem programming for perduring, living, not dying, procreating and survival, and in a more reactive, everyday lived manner, the impulses to explore, find pleasure, be secure, fight and flight, anxious avoidance. Feelings organize and channel all aspects of life. Experience implants coordinated future-related stimulus response connections. Experiences condition implant feelings that direct and impel behavior. Furthermore, many and complex body-based knowledges essential to survival are made possible and honed. Young of all species gain knowledge of the future, non-conscious and non-cognitive knowledge, by being conditioned by their parents and their environments. Lions and killer whales and bonobos impart much to their young'uns by response conditionings. Mammals and primates are profoundly conditionable. We humans are profoundly conditionable. Past experience and occurrences implant reactivities that accentuate or disallow present experience. But humans are conditionable in a new way. Words change everything. For us humans, higher level abstractions word experience can be conditioned to re-trigger and re-experience emotion of many sorts. Conditionable means that stimuli, an occurrence, can elicit feelings in such a way that the next time that occurrence takes place, the feeling will follow. Anxiety, high vigilance, complex fight-flight synergies, procreation-related hormonal symphonies, and quite a few other complexly body-based reactive patterns form the bargain basement expression of emotions. These, in all their simplicities and complexities, are the energy of material existence for all species. They motivate, they impel, even just to move. Although our high cognitive valuing, more abstract culture judges this as secondary, largely lower function related understanding, it controls us inexorably. And as culture gets more complex, knowledge embodied in conditioned reactivities can also be instantiated in cultural patterns, which in turn control us invisibly. Invisible as to the source of the impulses, yet causally. Cultural patterns create and control us inexorably. Why did we not see this? The past can protect and perfect the future, both for the individual and the group. Once burned, twice shy is the simplest expression of this revolutionary skill. A child accidentally touching a hot appliance will have a new, sharply elevated anxiety around hot objects. And he can vehemently warn his younger sister not to touch the stove, and she will now be protected by her borrowed fear. A language-enabled group can pass along conditionings via extended, shared inner speech. And a species can change itself, protect and perfect itself in a lived time by the ability to elaborate quickly implanted conditioned responses to environmental vicissitudes. And since words are full functioning analogs of existence, conditioned feelings attach themselves to words and become effective controllers of the individual. Just as importantly and more complexly, primates with retrievable object permanent memories, analogs of previous events, can condition their memories. Feelings, whether simple and primal or complex and multi-layer constructed, can trigger and be triggered by situations, words, or memories. High-level abstract symbols can be attached to feelings of many kinds, triggered consistently by feelings, and feelings can consistently trigger high-level abstract symbols and symbol complexes. Sexual urges can trigger complex dreams and daydreams of symbol analogs, images, words, story, just as daydreams can trigger and intensify sexual urges. Anxiety triggers flashes of threatening thoughts, while repetitive thoughts of bad things trigger and build anxiety. The past is made to affect the present. As with the great apes, aggression in its millionfold incarnations, plus social and sexual emotions, are the deep energies of almost everything that transpires in the culture. For us modern primates, the confounding part is that feelings linked to words happen so instantaneously and are so seamlessly triggered by
What
words.
are we anyways?
And demand action
What am I?
so immediately
What
that
are we
often enough we are not
anyways?
aware that the connection is created by past experiences. Words are profoundly conditionable. After all, they are things, effective analogs to existence, have become causative pads in our cerebral environments and easily evoke complex and intense feelings. And the conditioning is long-term and persistent. Words and memories in turn evoke the feelings originally attached to, paired with themselves. But feelings evoke words and complexes of words. They re-trigger and reconstruct stored memories of situations and abstract patterns. This is how they are effective and why they are protective at times. And since much of cognition is precognitive and unconscious, as we've seen many times, we humans are often ablaze and embroiled and awash in feelings of many varieties that are hard to pin down, hard to attach to explicit stimuli, and therefore somewhat inexplicable. But they do drive us. If previous generations were creating significantly different functioning children through radically different orientations to their children's upbringings, radically different regimes of word-language implantation, the systematic conditioning of the young would have been substantially different from the present eras. Previous conditionings may have been much less focused and coherent, or related to quite different aspects of survival. Not long ago, our cultures, spanked a wayward child and did a lot of yelling and threatening and hitting, attached intense negative feelings, valences, to behaviors we didn't want our children to perform. A fast and effective but somewhat blunderbuss coercion. Even 50 years ago, many parents also applied direct, somewhat aversive reactions to children of all ages, beginning quite young, for misbehavior or clear noncompliance. Sparing the rod would have led to spoiled children and possibly criminal adults, after all. In simpler, more authoritarian societies and family systems, the majority of children are often enough corralled and coerced and controlled by explosive and intensely unpleasurable consequences. Threats and their swift and painful execution were the rule. Societies at large were somewhat brutal and unyielding, and therefore congruent with the messages children received. And the lower classes, the poor, often had to be rougher than the better off. Think Game of Thrones violence for the majority. Of course, both boys and girls were brutalized into compliance, but the lives and every aspect of the behavior of girls were very minutely scrutinized, and their choices very tightly controlled, and non-compliance severely punished. Women as chattel, virginity as an indispensable life bargaining point, wives as beatable servants and near slaves. Freedom and equality was non-existent for the majority of females, particularly in agricultural settled groups and later in religion-plagued static city cultures. The fierce regime of sexual social compliance, perpetrated as much by mothers and grandmothers in the service and in the name of the system, the family honor, the church's prescriptions, your father's will, was both largely unarticulated and basically unchallengeable. And and frequently was more than tragic for the unwitting participants. The good old days, eh? The good old days. Little organized implanted knowledge, fewer highly developed logical critical thinking tools, a very nebulous sense of the past or future, a radically different relationship to lived space, and very little of the intense personalizing of everything that is typical of our societies. But for the majority, a much too short span of life, much brutality, and a fierce struggle just to stay alive. Which is not to say that previous primitive societies didn't have their own fierce conditionings. Napoleon Chagnon describes the Yanomamis' murderous ferocity and clan identification instilled into the boy children of the tribe almost from the first breath. And it may also be that people of previous ages were free from some modern compulsions and neuroticisms, such as constant and insatiable need to acquire, perseverative sexual stimulation, driving need for approval of many sorts, need for constant fantasy stimulation, addiction to storyland, and many other modern delicacies. Children, like all complex animals, can be conditioned. As the first words are implanting themselves in young Jonesy's mind, their archetypal simplicity is the starting point, as it must be. Without fanfare or much choice, warm, positive, associative feelings are paired with mama and dada, and hopefully most other experiencings of the newborn and young child. As our hero gets older and more mobile, once in a while someone gets a bit testy and lays a stronger "no, stop" on him, her. If someone is having a bad day, the child gets startled by the adult's intensity, and he may even get scared by full-out anger or an intensity he's not used to. We begin here gently, but in rare cases, there is quite intense angry or even rejecting negativity attached to situations Jonesy gets himself into. An overwrought, unsupported mom or dad or nana in serious personal distress. An unstable, mentally labile, mentally ill parent or guardian. An aggressive, rejecting, over-angry step-parent. An unusually active and difficult to condition child, a hyperreactive, almost impossible to soothe distressed youngster, some pre-autistic or pre-anxiety disordered atypical babies that are horrible fits for mothers or families that might cope perfectly well with a more typical child. Not all is sweetness and light, even in our times. In the everyday, and on average today, we immediately and instinctively try and make children repeat acceptable behavior by warmly attaching rewarding interventions to reinforce what we like. The young child's emotional being is being constructed. Words are being implanted and absorbed at an amazing rate. Stories are starting to be understood and craved and all but invisible, because it's handed down from generation to generation. Attaching of emotions to situations, behaviors, and concepts has begun. Somewhat unorganized compared to what will come later in school, and most of the time quite well-intentioned and gentle, we will soon see that this is certainly not always the case. The environment, we begin to shape behavior mod, conditioned towards compliance and social typicality. Today, our children are subject to messages, emotional valences related to group cohesion behaviors. We learn to sit still, listen attentively, speak constantly, worry about others' feelings. To internalizing group norms. We must at all costs be kind, help your friends, never hurt, no bullying, share. To compliance to the parents and their teachers' words and needs and commands. When I call you, Jonesy, come here at once. I need you to listen. It's not safe. The adult's need to implant strong social moral impulses into the still quite young child often determines a whole swath of choices and degrees of intensity of feelings and consistency of conditionings. Moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas very frequently sermonize, and many yell a lot too, pretty constantly at children in order to teach them. We interfere with the smallest misbehaviors and constantly reinforce what we think of as good. Much modern parenting literature and children's books and programming is stuffed with very sophisticated and value-laden emotional content. In videos and stories, differentiated voice modulation, build-up of tension, and an edge of scary danger. All types of primal media influences are skillfully manipulated to bring even quite young children to intense feeling states related to messages around cooperation, sharing, and friendship. Good behavior is contrasted exuberantly and exhaustively to the bad ends of palpably bad, ill-intentioned behavior. Disney divas and desperados. Not till later do we dispatch bad guys, evil witches, goblins, rapacious big bad wolves violently. But we all know that it's really only the good boys and girls who end up happy and being cheered and loved by all. And all your My Little Pony girlfriends will gush and praise and like you even more, while those Ninja Turtles will high-five you to death when you show your courage. Plus, the addictive nature of the medium. It's like having mommy tell a fabulous story again and again and again. Make the experiences fixative. And not only is the conditioning related to concepts and experiences outside the child, but the child is also being created as an I, as an embodied word self. The beginnings of the autobiographical self are coalescing, and this is one of the deepest and most long-standing kinds of conditionings. Later, we'll define knots K-N-O-T-S, a useful shorthand concept for the bundles of thoughts, feelings that are implanted, developed in the individual, and later become reflex reactivities to words and situations and people too. Reflex reactivities of concept and, more specifically, emotions. Most of us, most of the time, are all tied up in knots. Reflex beliefs, reflex prejudices, automatic sequences of thinking, feeling that play out in us as if we consciously chose what thoughts we've espoused and embraced. And we're naturally assured that these snippets of surety are just a little bit better than the other guy's sureties. The self doesn't choose what feeling complexes become implanted, but good thoughts and pleasing behavior become soothing, and bad thoughts and displeasing behavior become anxiety producing. And many complex ideas, impulses elicit complex feelings that drive us all to behavior. And it must be admitted, often enough confuse us along the way. These fragments of self and these formative happenings, which in time and in no time become functioning parts of ourselves and our patterns of being, are under construction by the environment. It is inevitable and entirely usual to fit these word memory self fragments into a feeling matrix that becomes deeply rooted in those self words themselves, and to condition the nervous system to respond not only with word association, but with embedded feeling associations of its own. Children are molded into gentlemen and ladies and good Hindus and Christian citizens and sterling Americans and patriotic Chinese. Conditioned feeling reactions are very important parts of the way animals with large cerebrums learn. With simians, social conditioning is powerfully determining and as necessary and predictive of success as almost any other aspect of life. You, monkey, find a place in the hierarchy or die. And human children must be conditioned to fit in the wild complexity of modern human culture if they are to survive. We see, although somewhat selectively, the outside controllers, truant officers, police, army, social workers, teachers, mommy, daddy, layer upon layer of laws and regulations, exhortations and aphorisms, not to mention innumerable cultural means. Don't drop that candy wrapper, it's littering. And in the old days, don't touch yourself like that, it's a sin. We don't recognize how we internalize many layers of emotional, verbal self-control. How we've become enmeshed in conditioned verbal anxieties that range from sledgehammer powerful, treat everyone respectfully, don't yell, keep your hands to yourself, to ever so subtle influences that inhibit us from even thinking about whole swaths of topics and actions. That's unkind. That's racist. That's a too terrible to think of crime. That's the devil speaking in you. And as prospective social simians, at the deepest level, what we're learning is wanting to please. Wanting to please the man, daddy, mommy, the teacher, and of course, eventually, wifey or hubby. Wanting to be a good citizen, a hero, wanting to please God in all things. And our advanced theory of mind abilities make us fantastically sensitive to other people's emotions, to other people's judgments, to how other people see us. We can project how they're thinking about us and plan our behaviors so they'll think better of us. And therefore, we're fearful of other people's judgments. If we watch ourselves and others closely, in many, many situations, we see the constant play of conditioned anxiety. To displease someone, to be shown up in social situations, to be too loud or too shy, too prudish or too sexy. The anxiety not to stand out of so many of us, and the fear of upsetting our wife, husband, mother, father, boss, co-worker, etc. And many of our thoughts revolve around being seen positively, making an impression, pleasing, appearing morally upright, and ending up on the winning or right side. Oh, to be normal. Our self-imposed and other imposed behavioral straitjackets begin when we're very young and are constructed, knit lovingly at every level by loved ones and enemies, by teachers and parsons, peers and bosses. And the fear of failure, fear of appearing weak or stupid or uncool, fear of being unattractive, fear of being a loser, fear of derision and ridicule suppress many for their whole lives. Seemingly small anxieties limit us inexorably, defeat plans, inhibit expression, keep us chained in our own psychic emotional prison. Virtue signaling is a modern meme that captures a powerful, mostly hidden, even from ourselves, emotionally satisfying form of pleasing mommy daddy. A child's cry to his parents, "Look at me, daddy. Look at me, world." People crave almost every form of social approval, can't live without it. Showing off wealth, taste, education, my luscious body, political astuteness, etc., while appearing not to. And the horror of social shaming. The internet has made the Twitterverse a fraught cosmos of imagined crime and punishment of so many varieties. Let me interrupt the flow of somewhat abstract thought a second to relate this process we're exploring to something concrete that I've been watching closely recently that relates directly to all this and that exemplifies it better than abstractions. My grandson, Jonesy, names have been changed to protect mommy and me, who you met earlier, is 2.5 And he's been cobbling together his verbal identity for the last 2 months with remarkable speed. 3 to 5 months ago, he had a quite wobbly central self-word that stuck in his mind and that initially allowed him to partake in the language drama simply that was all around him. Then all of a sudden, he started to use his name. He pronounced it Don or something, since he didn't have facility with a J sound yet, in simple referential modes like Don Ball or Don Toe, meaning his toe. Don Eat means Jonesy wants to eat, which meant that he really wanted to partake in whatever was happening, fun or food-wise. And he began to use very simple action words like Don Play or Don Tickle. And like good humans, we all immediately jumped to clarify for him both the syntax and meaning behind his newly and miraculously emerging awarenesses. And when he showed his genius and got what we wanted him to get, we'd jump up and down and say, yes, Don Tickle, and yes, Don Eat banana, as if amazed every time he used language instrumentally. Each time he did something spectacular, we'd all shower him with joyous acceptance and try to get him to say or do the word or action that won the original accolades. And it was easy to see how much we all had invested in helping him gain competence, and how our feelings of acceptance and joy at his accomplishment were being transferred to him, giving him impetus and energy to keep trying and accomplishing. Not to say that the organism doesn't have innate and powerful drives towards competence, but to point out how further, how powerfully we, the environment, shape the drive in the direction that we need it to go. And as he learns to crave our attention, he also learns to fear our upset anger or rejection. Even subtle anger from mommy, daddy, sister becomes devastating for many children. And even when they're 5, 6, or 7, anger can have a kid bawling his eyes out for 10 or 15 minutes sometimes. How powerful. And displeasing other children eventually also becomes determining. It's wonderful for me to watch this and to realize that the organism Jonesy was creating, the verbal self Jonesy, was being created right in front of our noses. And that even at this very early stage, we were implanting intense yet constricting, channeling emotional patterns of pleasing and compliance. And as this sweet little complexifying physical being started using his name to hook onto himself as the center of this particular proprioceptive, verbal, time constant experience of being in the world, that's kind of complicated, and feelings happening around him, he was being created ex nihilo. And clearly, even at this stage, words could carry intense feelings. As a neonate, he would cry when basic needs were not met, or he faced physical distress. As a toddler, and certainly later as a child, he would cry if he thought he was doing a bad thing, or somebody was angry, cross with him. Sometimes even when nobody was angry at him. Not only this, but all along All along, there were conditioned feelings being related and attached to words. Stove, hot, ouchie. No, no, not for Jonesy. No, don't say that. That hurts your sister's feelings. How would you like it? Parent anger when he was mischievous, and waves of titillation when he was cute, good, competent. We were also, in a manner of speaking, creating a fence around him. The fences were invisible. They were conditioned positive feelings when he pleased us, and limits were set up through negative feelings when he said or did things we disapproved of. Disobedience begets parental upset, which conditions anxiety in the child. Feelings are contagious, which reappears when the situation again invites disobedience. After many trials, over years really, Jonesy learns to be a good boy and gains our approval and avoids our displeasure. If you've ever had the experience of being around an ever angry parent who constantly criticizes and or yells at a child, you soon see behaviorally and sense emotionally that the child has attached many anxious and self-negating feelings to his or her core functioning. You could see it in mood, all kinds of behavior, and reactivity levels. The chapter on negative emotion follows this thinking further to some everyday nasty to truly brutal implantings of feelings in growing humans. And many of us learn to dance furiously to avoid anyone's anger for most of our lives. And many of us learn to avoid making anyone upset or angry. And many of us learn to be good, to have sweet, charitable thoughts, to not really feel salacious feelings of any sort, to never desire to steal or to strike out at or punch somebody's lights out. And we eventually unconsciously learn and embrace our conditionings to never really break the law. And these highly constricting and self-controlling implantations of anxieties become what evolve into our culture-induced straitjackets. And anxieties, mostly invisibly implanted and unspoken by their creators, anxieties in all their complexity, fit us into the world we're going to have to live in. The world machine needs compliant cogs for it to run. I do not say this as judgment or rebellion. The Yanomami need compliant cogs, just as the ancient Romans needed compliant cogs. Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature develops a powerful theme around the civilizing, domesticating nature of Leviathan, the many tentacled, powerfully controlling, constricting control structures of society. Army, police, truant officers, social workers, etc. are the visible exemplars of the outside control we tend to forget or never even notice anymore. But the emotional tentacles of our deep conditionings are much more subtle and thoroughgoing and almost invisible. In some ways, we idealize and deeply embrace even our slaveries. But what was also taking place for young developing Jonesy was the constant tying of emotional qualifiers and conditioned valuations to all the words and actions that he was putting together. Sometimes his sister is full of thanks and happy acceptance for what he says and does. And sometimes he's in serious trouble, and feelings of bad and no are attached to his word-action experiences. And then, ta-da! He has to learn to please his friends, or they may not come over to play anymore. And the teens really, really need to please each other, desperate to play together. And I'd love to please my new girlfriend so much that she'd want to spend her whole life with me. Be nice, don't hit, share that donut. All the conditioning pays off if a child is good, respectful, and reasonably obedient. And of course, ultimately, he needs to please his girlfriend, wife, and boss, and superior officer. Sometimes an action gets the whole local universe, including himself, if he tried to put his finger into the electricity socket again, in a tizzy of negatives to teach Jonesy right from wrong. Other times he's bathed in almost extravagant warm acceptance, especially when he conforms and also when he shows traits we love in children. And the positive conditioners are much more powerful and controlling than the negatives. This is what many miss, or more likely consciously ignore. They think conditioning is about cattle prods and spankings, when much of the power, in modern times anyways, is much more subtle because it's wrapped in ever so addictive attachment rewards. Our straitjackets of internal control are woven of strokes, touch, and soft words as much as by the negative. But together, the two kinds of feelings are quite powerful, determining. Because much conditioning is neither overt nor noted by either donor or recipient, it is mostly a non-conscious phenomenon. It is a domain of cultural construction. Words are created non-consciously, especially during the first 7 or 8 years, and emotional conditionings are fixed during this time, also non-consciously. Thoughts can be inhibited by anxiety, impulses inhibited before they even can surface. And the draw to be pleasing, to get good reflection from those around us happens below the threshold of consciousness, especially at these early ages. And remember, we're also developing complex theory of mind, which makes us super aware of what mommy, daddy are thinking and feeling about us, feeling about me. We learn to crave approbation of many sorts. Even the somewhat antisocial gang member seeks glory, acknowledgement, and the capo's approval. Positive conditionings fix patterns of behavior, verbal and physical. And all these variable implantations are further fixed by our natural naked ape hypersensitivity to sociability factors. This is all natural. What is not noted, or in my opinion, well understood, is how personal cultural conditionings drive so much of life. And as with words, the complex system of emotional reactivity is created in us and becomes who we are. Who we are, literally. And when emotions are wired together with experiences and important words, the organism becomes something it was not. Culture not only constructs the abstract word self, but it constructs all the emotional reaction patterns that entrain and constrain most of our behaviors. We're scarcely aware that all the media viewing that we do create background reactivities, reflexes of thought, value, and feelings that are the culture we inhabit. We absorb the culture's values and valences continually, though we imagine we've come up with our very own individual value system autonomously. And in time, we become incapable of perceiving outside the constructed brain structures, both cognitive and behavioral. Words are deeply encoded abstractly to each other and to the nascent self, but also attached emotionally. Some words and feelings start to receive preferential status from the very, very beginning. And some very deep feelings are selectively attached to words that signify Jonesy's very self. Knots. Knots are skeins of long ago word emotion conditionings and patterns of loosely linked thoughts or or unconsciously triggered memory value complexes that are integral to us, formative of us. They often form under familial influence. A few thoughts come to carry such intense emotional valence that other thoughts are blocked, kept suppressed, left unexamined. When the environment triggers a knot, situations, but in modern times especially words, memes, media, but also inner speech, internal monologue, memories. When environment triggers a knot, loops of conditioned thoughts, feelings play in me. Our core beliefs and core prejudices happen. And they happen with a jolt of energy, especially when challenged or denied. Much of politics are not much more than loosely connected knots that make me feel good. We imagine we're highly logical and our values coherent. But the ideas we've imbibed at critical times are loosely attached bundles of concept memes that make us feel good. And local echo niches of values make local citizens who are sure, and often very smug, in what they believe. Religious knots often drive life and behavior for scores of years. I feel myself more right than you, more righteous, smarter. My ideas, core beliefs, are obviously true and moral, much more than yours. When I hear what you think, I'm upset. I can't even think about the tripe coming out of your mouth. And because we don't remember or even recognize where our intensely personal, significant thoughts come from, or how feeling joints them together, We mostly live in feelings of righteous justification. Political knots, social knots, religious knots, clan knots, caste knots, etc. They are both positive and negative. If Jonesy lived in abuse, constant anger, irritated negativity, he would not only be unhappy, but would be introjecting strong negative valences into his very soul, into his core reactivities concerning himself. Good people have been so well conditioned to have good thoughts and good feelings that they can scarcely conceive alternatives. And bad people, not us, our enemies, have rages and destructive impulses that have been created in them by their own personal social echo niches. We are conditioned into our caste, into our social group, and we are conditioned to a whole host of positive and negative feelings about topics, positive and negative feelings about people, about groups, positive and negative feelings about certain ideas. Conditionings that control thought and impulses and behavior often stay with us throughout our whole lives. Our homogenized and oversimplified view of the world, as seen on TV, doesn't take into account the thousands and even millions of idiosyncratic subcultural variations that are actually quite determining. And when children are profoundly conditioned by differential emotional valences, they become good citizens, sometimes of evil societies. Children in North Korea truly love their great leader and starve, somewhat happily, for the values that have been brainwashed. They have been brainwashed to embrace. The same is true for children brought up in violence, child soldiers, and in crime societies, but also in the myriad idiosyncratic societal niches of this wide world. Children, and adults too, as you may have noticed, can be conditioned to become suicide bombers, happily blowing themselves to kingdom come with righteous glee. Us Westerners have been conditioned to imagine and espouse our own exceptionalism and many more ego-inflating goodies that set us above the rest. And we can hardly think any other way. Knots. Words meshed in deep conditioning both attract and inhibit. Original values absorbed in early family environments that stay with us till we die. We attach strong emotive conditionings to primal needs and impulses quite well. Social hierarchy competitiveness, clan solidarity, family solidarity, mate competitiveness, intense security needs are all deeply embedded primate imperatives. We conscientiously and consistently condition ourselves and our children to want to rise up in the social hierarchies and become the best of the best. We construct children to honor family and group and team. In many societies, to besmirch the family name is truly emotionally beyond the pale. We tart up our girl children, in spite of much modern rhetoric, and muscle up our boy children to compete for the most delicious and delectable mates. In spite of thousands of years of religious kvetching, we induce high acquisitiveness and seemingly insatiable desire of every kind into ourselves. And we strive fiercely and somewhat neurotically to protect ourselves and our loved ones from all and every danger. At the same time, we impart taboos and anxiously constricting emotions. Theory of mind helps us to identify very closely with people like us. We are extremely anxious not to hurt other people's feelings and not to do what we know is wrong. We are sensitively attuned to other people's feelings, and we are constantly worried about their most subtle reactions. It seems to me that many of us are neurotically anxious about so many things. Although there are all kinds of highfalutin denials and nice stories we tell ourselves, overwhelmingly we seek success, riches, and attractive partners, and group acknowledgement. Sometimes, after we've kind of given up, capitulated for ourselves, later we lust after success, not so much for ourselves, but for our offspring. And because we can hold analogs of existent things, words and short stories relating to the world, indefinitely, we can feel bad for very long times. Many seem guilt-ridden and anxiety-ridden all their lives. Imagination, subtle or sledgehammer nasty mental pictures feelings, imagination tortures us. Often deep feelings follow deep impulses that are antagonistic, at war with, to very complex words and stories we want to follow. Parts of us are dictated to by pleasing and edifying stories that we would love to emulate, while other parts of us are at times taken over by long suppressed but compelling needs. The idealized word space is constantly belied by the harsh truth of the emotion space. Imagine the myriad word emotion experiences of a Yanomami girl child. Can you? Imagine the word emotion experiences of a high status, wealthy Korean boy of quite high intelligence. A poor Soweto boy with undescended testicles. A one-armed Iger whose father is a headman. An illegal Mexican with severe dyslexia trying to eke out a living in LA. Are all of these a very small sampling of difference? Are all of these humans the same? Can we really communicate? Do we all want the same thing? And who is better? Who is really right?